So someone in chat asked me why we allow our government to get bought by foreign and rich interests and how it's ridiculous that Elon Musk gets away with influencing American politics. And this chatter is absolutely correct. It is ridiculous that this happens. And you know who agrees with you? Most of the British public do. So this is from Luke Trill, who is the director of More in Common, who are an pollster who I think do really good work involving focus groups and trying to get people down on the real issues they care about rather than just kind of doing blanket polling. And according to Luke, too many people think that democracy isn't working. Only 31% of Brits say democracy is working, with cynicism high across all voter and non-voter groups, but particularly those who backed non-mainstream parties in July. And is it any wonder when essentially our political class, they get away with not really answering questions, not really being held properly to public scrutiny. Our elected officials seem to get away with far more than they should do. It seems like one rule for them, another rule for everybody else. They inhabit different worlds. Very few of them have actually had real jobs, have ever actually interacted with members of the public. They have been career politicians who have been put in there ever since they were at university, the Labour student types or the Tory public school people, or indeed the rich bankers that you get who are MPs for Reform UK or commodities brokers or property investors. These are not put upon members of the working class there, really, are they? No, these are the posh, the elite, the politically careerist within all of the kind of mainstream parties. I think that's true. But in general, democracy just hasn't delivered broadly what the public wants. There are so many issues in which our mainstream political parties are massively out of touch with the broader views of the public, especially on the economy. And what's interesting as well is that despite the fact that people like to tell us here on the left that our dislike of the rich people, or the successful as they call them, is motivated by envy, the biggest leftist complaint that we have over people being rich is the influence that makes them have on society, the amount of power it gives them. Leftism is a analysis of power relations and how much power the rich people have to influence politics. And you know who agrees with us? Lots of society do as well. As Luke Trill goes on to say, this isn't something on the more benign end of the scale, i.e. talking about the electoral system. It's deeper than that. 3/4 of people think that the British government is rigged to serve the rich and influential rather than the will of the British people. They agree with us here on the left. The issue with the rich is that they have too much power to influence politics. They have too much power to be able to change how politics works and shape society in their favour, to control cultural hegemony, to control the levers of politics. So when it comes to things like, I don't know, water nationalisation, something the public broadly backs overwhelmingly. Loads of different nationalisation is supported by the public, whether it be water, rail, mail, all that kind of malarkey. It's broadly supported, yet it doesn't happen. No politician wants it to happen, and when they do want it to happen, like in the case of Jeremy Corbyn, they get monstered by the media for it as well. Even though these are broadly in the interest of the public do support it. The public supports so many things like taxing on private schools, that's supported by the public. The public also support increased rights for workers. They support taxes on businesses, like the increase in national insurance contributions for employers. They support this too. Yet we get talked about it like it's like the biggest thing that's going to destroy our economy because it's going to hurt businesses. People don't actually really care. The public broadly support these policies. And that's why I think the people trying to attack Labour over legitimate grievances they have, which the media don't really get, about the gift story, the donation story. Because the fact that the donations from places like Quadrature, the big capital investment firm, the big hedge fund, it's far worse to me than the Taylor Swift tickets, even though the Taylor Swift tickets are bad. Is because it's symptomatic of this idea that there's one rule for one group of people and another rule for another group of people, for everybody else, right? And people within the public understand that monetary donations and schmoozing and all of these different circles these people go in where they get treated, they get access. This is how politics works in this country. Of course, the media know that this is how politics works, but they think that it's fine. They don't recognise it as being a problem. And the public, now it's being reported on in the way that the press didn't expect it to capture the public's imagination so much. I think there's this dawning realisation that people do understand now that our politics has been bought out by rich interests. Now, this is a problem of democracy under capitalism. This is a problem with the wealth disparity, especially under neoliberal, unregulated neoliberal capitalism, that having huge amounts of wealth creates. Capitalism relies on a state, it relies on a state to function. The people who have the power are the ones who have the money and influence to be able to dictate policy. That is how democracy becomes democracy for an insignificant minority, democracy for the rich under capitalism. Because when you have huge wealth disparity, when you have billionaires and the immiserated within your society, why would you want to gain the influence of those who aren't the people who have the money to change it? Focus their messaging on getting non-voters out rather than trying to convert Tories. I mean, I agree. By buying into Tory narrative, they are, unknowingly probably, allowing these people who feel like democracy doesn't work to continue thinking that it doesn't work. They're not winning these people back by appointing David Gork to do their prison sentencing review, because it makes it look like that there is a singular group of people who are in charge, i.e. the political class, rather than different competing people who will have their own visions for the country. And what's frustrating is the framing here is Luke saying, well, people think that the government is rigged to serve rich and influential people, and that's a problem that they think that. How about that they're right, Luke? How about that they're absolutely correct, Luke? And the problem is that you think the problem is changing people's perceptions, and not indeed that democracy itself in this country absolutely is broken. I find it interesting, really, that it's natural Tory voters who are the least likely to think that the government serves the rich and powerful. Even Reform UK voters think that's true, more so than Labour and Liberal Democrat voters. Interesting when Reform UK voters are voting for a party that's controlled by the rich and powerful. All its MPs are incredibly rich and wealthy. Lots of them are bankers, literally the people who are the responsible for huge amounts of inequality that spawned out of the global financial crisis. And on top of that, Nigel Farage himself is so rich that he wanted to bank at the rich person's bank whilst he's a commodities broker. These people are incredibly rich. That's the interest they want served. It's why Rupert Lowe at Reform UK conference wanted less regulation on the banks. He wanted less regulation on the financial sector, the people who a lot of the public perceive to be the enemy. Big business, corporations, the financial sector, bankers, all these kind of people are perceived to be the rich with which democracy is fixed to serve the interests of, yet they still support Reform UK in spite of that, which I find really interesting, and I don't know if anyone else has any takes on why that might be. But when the consensus broadly across all of these parties is that the rich are served outside of the Tories, it shows you how out of touch people who still vote Tory really are. Because even Reform UK voters, people who kind of are supporting the party that is closest to the Tories in terms of political ideology, there's a stark difference in the way in which that they perceive democracy to be going in this country, where Reform UK voters are far similar to people who vote for the Greens than they are with people who vote Tory in terms of how they view democracy as being broken. And I think a lot of these Labour voters think democracy is broken because they felt like they had to vote for the Labour Party, who they believed under Keir Starmer probably didn't really serve their interest much anymore, because it's true. Unfortunately, Sir Tricom and his £4 million quadrature donation maybe don't have the broad public interest at heart in the same way the Labour Party used to do so. Trill goes on to say, and I think for me is arguably more damning, along with the apathy, disillusionment and cynicism, there is also a deeper sense of futility, that our politicians aren't up to facing the challenges our country faces. People think our politics is both rigged and not up to it. Yes, but I believe that they think that it's not up to it because they have been bought out by the rich and powerful interests mentioned in the previous tweet, mentioned in the previous graph. It's interesting as well that the sector of society that is most disillusioned with our political class in this graph is what Maureen Common has referred to as disengaged battlers. Now, I have a lot of problems with Maureen Common's stratification of society into these kind of 7 different groups. I think it's really myopic. But if you take this group to be what Maureen Common says they are, which is people who are disengaged from politics, but who are broadly on the thin end of the wedge, who are at the bottom of the scale in terms of income, in terms of their stake in society, basically they're poor. If you take his summation of the disengaged battlers to just be poor people who are politically disengaged, right? Is it any wonder that they think that our politicians don't serve their interests? Now, I think that the electoral system has something to blame here too, where parties will chase over mythical swing voters who are in the middle of the income distribution, the aspirational class so-and-so, which is why Labour ditched a bunch of their progressive policies, because they didn't want to think, oh, we might damage the mortgage rates of people who are scared to vote for us because they see themselves as the aspirational class. They perceive people from this disengaged battlers group to be their voting demographic who will turn out for them regardless. And so they have to fight for the individual swing voters. Yet they've left these people behind, and not just in terms of whether they're going to vote for them or not, but in terms of even thinking that they're politicians who are up to the job of dealing with the problems of the country facing. Because what's happened to this group of people, the poorest in society, from 45 years of neoliberal governance? Have they ever been served by any party that's in power? Thatcher, Blair, Cameron, May, Johnson, Truss, Sunak, Starmer, what have they done with their governance other than try and appeal to Middle England swing voters? Very little. Very little. Like, the Gini coefficient has only increased since 1979. The country's only become more unequal. The country's only had more power being given to the big businesses, to big people, to big corporations, to the rich and the powerful. That's only gotten worse since 1979. And unless that momentum is arrested, and forcefully so, and strongly and vocally, this group of people who feel completely unserved by politicians, they're going to have to find somewhere else to go, because the Labour Party, quote unquote, is no longer serving their interests. You don't just hear this in the data, you hear it viscerally in focus groups. I've said before, doing focus groups during the election often felt like being hit with a battering ram of disillusionment that often bordered on, occasionally spilled over into anger. What is so striking is the sense that things just aren't right with Britain. Isn't limited to one group or demographic. Focus groups of working class voters in Blythe, young professionals in Hackney, Muslim voters in Birmingham, pensioners in Surrey all shared the same views. What's driving it, and by extension what does the government need to be looking at in the budget and beyond? First and most obvious, everything feels crap, things are too expensive, the NHS doesn't work in the way that it should, and promises on levelling up and immigration haven't been kept. And I think this is all good analysis here. This is all good observation here by Luke from More in Common. I think he's right to say that every single sector of society feels like it doesn't work anymore. Apart from, clearly, the established liberals. Again, the mythical swing voters, the people who are being pandered to and have been pandered to for 45 years electorally, the only people who think the opposite. But it's true. I mean, you look at all of these people, young professionals want to be upwardly mobile, but even the good jobs in society don't pay as much as they do overseas. And you're still using the shitty NHS that everybody else does. And you can't even buy yourself a house because even on, above median wages, you're on £50,000 a year. You can't really afford to save up for a deposit to buy a house, let alone if you earn £25,000 or £20,000, like most people do in this country. Under 35,000 is the majority, is the other half of society. That's below the median yearly income, £35,000. Muslim voters are looking at our foreign policy. Obviously, they're poorer. Muslim voters generally come from more deprived communities. Of course, they're disillusioned with politics when the deprived communities are the ones who haven't been levelled up. As you say, like, promises levelling up clearly haven't been met at all because, again, it serves the rich and powerful in London, not the deprived communities outside of London. But Muslim voters have also seen our political class be completely out of step with us on foreign policy. Completely out of step with the majority of this country that wants us to get tough with Israel, and the government just won't do it. And people who live in Blythe have seen their industries destroyed. And where's the policy platform to rebuild those industries? There was tough talk in the run-up to the election of industrial strategy from the Labour Party. There was tough talk about industrial strategy from Labour in the run-up to the election. There was all of this discussion of this huge investment they were going to do to build green jobs, to create the industries of the future, to bring jobs back to Britain, to rebuild building in Britain. And yet they slashed that to give more investment opportunities to big green finance initiatives. And all that's doing not only is reifying the belief that the government serves the rich rather than everybody else because public investment has been cut back to be replaced with private finance investment from big investment firms, but also this idea that there is this kind of net zero establishment to make money out of people with net zero rather than it being an opportunity to rebuild the energy production in this country for the interest of everybody and the interest of stopping climate change. I can understand why every single group here feels hard done by, apart from pensioners, of course. I don't see why pensioners should have to complain when they have their gold-plated triple-lock pension. Not that it's gold-plated in terms of good in international standards, because it isn't. But most pensioners also got cheap houses that are now worth loads as well. I mean, they're probably upset with the state of the NHS. And with regards to that, you kind of got what you wanted if you voted Tory and you're a pensioner, which most likely you did. Because You were the ones who voted for the people who destroyed the NHS. It's as simple as that. But they still should feel aggrieved with the state of the NHS because they voted for a party that promised not to cut the NHS. To quote David Cameron, "I will cut the deficit and not the NHS." What did they do? They cut the NHS because they lied. And there is no consequences for lying unless it's about being ambushed by cake. Another way in which politics doesn't work in this country. It's obviously not just the macro stuff. For too many people, too much of everyday life feels like a series of minor struggles and frictions. The scramble to get a GP appointment, the inability to speak to a real person in public or customer services, potholes wrecking your suspension. I mean, this is true, but I think this is also exemplified by the macro stuff as well. This is a symptom of the macro problems of neoliberalism. This is a symptom of the macro problems being found in micro form, right? It's just like the Northern Rail story where people were literally getting criminal prosecutions for not reading the tiny fine print on a rail card. So they had like £100 of fines plus a criminal record for paying £1.90 less than what their ticket said because they paid for a ticket under £12 before 10 a.m, not in August and July, whilst having a rail card. Like, this seems like the biggest, most ridiculous thing that's there to attack normal people in a completely unfair way. But it's a symptom of neoliberalism. Some of these issues is vital to restoring the sense that democracy can actually make the country and people's day-to-day better and easier, but I think it still only gets you 60 to 70% of the way there. Narrative matters too. The problem is that restoring the sense that democracy can actually make the country and people's day-to-day better and easier involves changing democracy itself. Rather than electing better people or the politicians just being better, you have to change the nature of the democracy itself. It is a fact of capitalist democracy that Democrats themselves will be influenced by capitalists. And that's the problem here. Again, I think that Luke's heart is in the right place with his comments here. I think he's, again, misapprehending this as being a problem of poor governance rather than systemic issues. Again, the liberal idea that you replace the bad people with good people rather than the bad system with a better system. Our work with the UCL Policy Lab has found people think politicians don't respect ordinary people, and that respect has become equated with being rich/having a degree rather than respecting the contribution of those who keep the show on the road. This is a problem of neoliberalism. The neoliberal ideology that tries to equivocate between wealth and societal contribution leads to lack of respect for those who aren't wealthy. It's not become equated with being rich, it is equated with being rich. In neoliberal society, if you are rich, you are perceived to be somebody who has been successful, and the wealth that you've accumulated is seen to be correlated with your contribution to society. This market logic has reached this point. If you're a factory worker or a care worker or a retail worker or a farmer or a teacher, a plumber, I mean, less so a plumber, but all of these employment roles, especially people who work in care or in retail, you make way less money than the rich, obviously. And therefore, under neoliberal philosophy, you are seen to be worth less to society because you make less money. Your role in society is paid less, therefore it is worth less, therefore you are worth less. You contribute less, for example. This is neoliberal philosophy. This is capitalist philosophy. You have to change people's minds on this is by changing the system, changing our philosophy away from neoliberal philosophy, and respecting people for the work that they do in contributing to society holistically rather than in financial terms. Part of the reason people feel loss of respect is because of scandal/sleaze. It all communicates a sense that our political class doesn't respect the people that they are elected to serve. Again, yeah, it feels unfair because it is. Part of it is a respect for contribution. The number of people who I've spoken to over the past year who've said a version of, I just live to work and work to live and don't have anything left at the month to show for it, people need to know their work will be rewarded. Welcome to neoliberalism. What do you think has caused wages to get so bad that people can't afford anything outside of living to work? And that was supply-side labour market reform, which was neoliberal doctrinaire policy that the Conservatives did for their entirety of their time in office from 1979 until today, that was only slightly pushed back on by the Blair administration. The demise of the trade union movement. The trade unions that were specifically created to create solidarity between people for the role that people have. The fundamental part that our contribution to society is so important that if we down tools and we stop, we can bargain for better wages. We can bargain for a larger slice of the pie. Because if we stop working, the country collapses. That's what the trade union movement symbolised and recognised. It was destroyed by neoliberalism. And now, who the hell respects workers anymore? Because Without the threat of industrial action, we don't treat them like people who are an important cog in the functioning of society. We treat them like poor people who don't make as much money, so are less important. And CEOs and all those kind of people, if they down tools and start working tomorrow, the country would work just fine. The guy who goes to the power station to keep the lights on, the woman who goes to work in their care home to keep all the old people alive and well, all of the people across society who go to their everyday jobs in shops, in factories, in farms, in call centres, in the NHS, if they down tools, the country grinds to a halt. And without that trade union movement, that respect for contribution that Luke Trill talks about here, that's where it's disappeared. Because the contribution is based upon the economic relevance that they have. At least we can take from this is that people do think Britain is broken. People do believe democracy doesn't work. People do believe that society is structured to benefit the super rich and the powerful. The question is, how do we use that information to win people to our side? When this Labour government fails, which inevitably it will, we will have to be there to pick up the pieces. The question is, what are we going to be trying to sell to people as our solution to this problem? Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for memberships. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.